Good evening and welcome to Law Talk, the show that brings the Constitution, the law, and the events of today to you each month. Good evening. James Barrett, Mark Malachowski, and Kevin Kiley. Kevin's our guest tonight. And Mark, what's Kevin going to present?
Well, Kevin drove all the way down here from Sacramento to talk to us, and he works for the state of California, and he's a deputy attorney general. And we're going to talk about Proposition 47 tonight. But first, Kevin, why don't you give us a little bit about information about your background? What's your educational background? What's your work history? How did you get to this point in life?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark, and thanks very much for having me. I'm excited about the opportunity to discuss an issue that I think is of great importance to our state. You know, I grew up a bit east of Sacramento in a town called Granite Bay, graduated from Granite Bay High School, part of the 5th graduating class there. I went back east and got my education at Harvard for college and Yale for law school. Although before I became a lawyer, I was a high school teacher down in South Central Los Angeles, where I taught 10th grade English at one of our state's most underserved high schools.
And so now you're working for the state. What's your position there?
Most recently I've worked as a deputy attorney general for the state of California.
Okay. And aren't you, what's this tag you have on your
Oh, how did that
there?
get there?
What's that about?
So about 8 months ago, I declared my candidacy for the California State Assembly to represent the district where I grew up and which has been my home. And we now are about 4 months away from the election. The primary is June 7th. And one of the main reasons that I'm running is because I'm really concerned about rising crime rates in California.
Well, is there something that proved as a catalyst that increased the crime rates in California?
Well, I'll tell you, if you are a state prisoner in California right now, you are in the midst of a golden age. From the weakening of 3 strikes to realignment to Governor Brown's latest proposal to let even more prisoners out early. It's like you wake up every day and there's a new way to be released from prison early. But probably the most egregious example of this is an initiative that was passed in 2014 known as Proposition 47.
Now, some people have called this Proposition 14 a get-out-of-jail-free card, but other people have termed it as a sensible, long sought-after and long-deserved reform. What's your opinion on this?
Well, the reason that some have called Proposition 47 a get-out-of-jail-free card is that there are about 1 million Californians who are suddenly eligible for resentencing, that is to say, to have their punishment reduced once this thing passed.
Kevin, wait a minute. You're talking about judges and DAs have spent all this energy putting people in prison, but now we're just going to let them go? What's the basis for that?
The basis for it is a misguided social agenda that has sought to reduce or even eliminate the consequences of criminal activity.
Release the consequences?
Well, okay, so this is Proposition 47. So when did this come into law?
It took effect shortly after its passage in 2014, I believe at the beginning of 2015. So it's been in effect about a year.
Okay, and in this year, has there been any tangible result? I mean, what's it seem like? Does it seem like it's got the desired result of more fairness, or did it seem like it's just letting criminals go who don't deserve to let go? What have we seen so far in that year?
Well, what we've seen, and law enforcement is pretty much unanimous in this opinion, is an absolute disaster when it comes to public safety. We have rising crime rates across our state when it comes to property theft, when it comes to quality of life offenses, vagrancy, and we even see an uptick in violent crimes across California.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the specifics, exactly what Proposition 47 does. It reduces the gravity of some crimes.
Correct.
Crimes that previously were felonies, which means you get more than a year in jail, right, are now misdemeanors, which means you get less than a year in jail, right?
Or oftentimes no time in jail at all.
Okay.
You're just, or maybe you spend a night there and then you're released. In practice, you get a ticket for a lot of these offenses now, whereas before, we'd be talking about a prison term.
No, if you get a felony, you're restricted, you can't vote, right?
That's correct.
And you
also
can't have a
firearm.
Can't have a firearm. And
No passport.
And there's restrictions on your passport. So basically, if a felon can't vote, can't hold a firearm, and can't have a passport. So those are pretty strong, deterrents. And so those deterrents are no longer going to be in effect for those particular crimes that
That's
have been
correct.
reclassified.
That's correct.
Okay, someone can still keep their guns, they can still vote, and they can still have a passport. Leave the
That's
country.
correct.
Okay, all right.
But what I have to ask is,
And also, you get, if you're in a civil trial, you can be impeached. So very impeachable. If you have a felony, that's
of course.
If you're signing a declaration, one of the things, are you competent to testify? Felony, the judge might do a jury instruction saying, yeah, this guy can testify, but everyone should know he's got a felony.
That's
and
all
take
true.
that into consideration.
And that's all true. The most important thing, though, is that if you're convicted of a felony, then you're removed from society, and you're no longer, at least for the term of your imprisonment, out there committing other crimes.
well, see, that's the thing. That's a deterrent factor. But now they're removing the deterrent factor with Proposition
Correct.
47.
Correct.
So, Mark, I got a question. You do criminal law. I do
Right.
criminal law. I know that people that are in court with me, and I see them, and you hear their crimes. These people aren't petty criminals.
Right.
They're serious criminals. And so when you're talking about opening the prison doors to let these people out, there's got to be an impact on society that's the unintended consequences
Correct.
of these laws. So who supported this law?
Yeah, who was on the side of this thing?
You know, it's the same folks who have supported the weakening of 3 strikes, who have supported the way we did realignment, where we shifted a lot of prisoners to county jails and then let a lot of people out of the county jails. And the same folks who, along with Governor Brown, are supporting the further weakening of our sentencing laws on an initiative that'll be on the ballot this November, with Governor Brown putting his war chest behind it. It's a agenda of leniency. It's a misguided social agenda. And in the case of Prop 47, it was sold to the public as an act of compassion.
So I understand the teachers were for this, some rehab experts, civil rights organization, faith leaders. But when you look at some of the literature, it's pretty vague of who supported it. I mean, they don't have any specific association, just kind of these vague categories.
That's right.
And then if you look at the people who are against it, who are against it? Can you think
Every
of any?
single district attorney in the state of California was against it, with one exception, and that's the DA of San Francisco.
Wow.
And so basically,
That speaks for
the
itself.
proponents were pretty much anonymous or unnamed, it seemed like, and the opponents pretty much stated who they were.
That's right, Mark. And if the public was truly aware of what this proposition entailed, then I am certain that Californians never would have supported it.
Now, there's a question. People look at prison now. Do you look at prison? Is this more for punishment, or is this for rehabilitation? What's the theory of crime and punishment as you see it?
Well, I mean, I think prisons exist for one reason, and that's to keep our communities safe. And they do this, as you say, by deterring people from committing crimes because they're aware of what the consequences will be. They do it from removing people from society so they can't continue to commit crimes. And they do it by rehabilitating offenders so they're better prepared to re-enter society and become productive members of society upon the release. And of course, underlying all of this is the aim of providing a measure of justice to victims.
Okay, and so victim groups, which side of this question did victim groups fall on?
They came down quite emphatically against Proposition 47, along with law enforcement.
So there wasn't a lot of victim groups that said, we want to do more leniency kind of thing towards
That's right.
these prisoners.
Victims often get forgot in these debates, which is unfortunate.
Well, wait a minute. So let me ask you a general question. Where's the pendulum swinging right now in the state of California when you talk about punishment versus rehabilitation? Are we on the rehabilitation side, in the middle, on the punishment side? Where are we?
Well, I don't see those two as a trade-off. I think that one of the tragedies of Prop 47 is that it has both reduced punishment below what's appropriate, while at the same time weakening rehabilitation. Let me give you one example. It used to be the case that if you're convicted of drug possession, this includes Class A drugs like cocaine and heroin, prosecutors could use the leverage of a possible felony conviction to pressure the offender into signing up for drug court. And drug court is an incredibly valuable tool in getting addicts the help that they need so that they can get their lives back. But now, there's no longer that leverage. Prosecutors have been handcuffed. They can't threaten a felony conviction. Instead, the offender is faced with the choice of the slap on the wrist misdemeanor conviction, get out of jail free card, or the 18-month intensive drug court, and guess which they choose.
Wow.
Okay, and so
That's
also,
slapping.
and don't prosecutors sometimes use that bargaining position to turn informants and that kind of thing as well?
Sure. I mean, I'm not sure how directly applicable that is to this situation, but the broader point is that we need to give law enforcement the tools they need to do their jobs and to keep our communities safe. And we've been moving in exactly the opposite direction. And when you do that, it's bad for public safety, it's bad for rehabilitation, it's bad for the offenders themselves because they're deprived of the treatment they need to turn their lives around.
All right, well, I understand that's good. Mark, we have a second part of this we wanted to cover. Why don't you go to that?
Okay, well, let's go into the more technical details of Proposition 47. What crimes now are eligible for this kind of leniency? What types of crimes?
It includes theft offenses, so long as the value of the property is $950 or less. It includes most drug possession offenses. It includes forgery, writing bad checks, some forms of fraud, identity theft, receiving stolen property. And I'll just highlight a couple of specific examples. Under current law, after the passage of Proposition 47, you can steal a gun. And so long as the value of that gun is less than $950, it's a misdemeanor. There's a case on record where a criminal was caught with a gun that he had stolen. The officer writes him a ticket, lets him go. And this is actually in the police report. The offender says, "But I had a gun. What's wrong with this country?" Another example is possession of a date rape drug.
Is that
now a
roofies
misdemeanor.
or
Yeah, exactly.
There's a special term for it. Roofaline?
Roofaline, that's right.
Roofaline.
And that's a misdemeanor. And so the legislature actually, this was such an outrageous example of what Proposition 47 did, that the legislature actually acted to make it a felony to possess the date rape drug with the intent to commit sexual assault.
Whoa,
and guess what Governor
with the
Brown
intent?
did? With the intent.
But
And you
how
think
do we
Governor
know
Brown
that?
signed the bill?
Yeah, how do we find that?
Well, that's a question in any crime. There's always an intent element. But the governor vetoed the bill, saying that we have too many felonies already.
Okay, so we're talking about marijuana, what commonly called pot. We're talking about heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, roofies. All these, possession of this for personal use is now a misdemeanor and it's not a felony.
That's
Is that correct? Okay. Now, what about possession of any of these with intent to sell?
Now that remains a felony.
That remains a
Or at
felony.
least in most cases, prosecutors have the authority to charge it as a felony.
Okay, and so fraud, forgery, bouncing checks, identity theft, anything under $950, that's now a misdemeanor.
That's right. And here's the key point.
And receiving stolen property. Right?
Yeah, there's no escalation of penalties. So you can do it again and again and again. This has led to the so-called frequent flyers. These are folks out there who know exactly what the threshold is, and so they know to steal just below $950. There are cases where people walk into a store with a calculator to make sure that their contraband is less than $950.
But I mean, I do some DUI defense, and I know the first offense for a DUI is not the same as the second offense for a DUI. It's not the same as the third offense
exactly.
for a DUI.
That's the way criminal law should work.
So you're saying that here, your first offense for stealing a $949 from a store is the same as your second offense and your third offense and your fourth and your fifth offense?
Yep, there are people who have been convicted 13, 14, 15 times. And they're given a ticket each time and no real consequence. And this is one reason why, in addition to law enforcement groups, retail associations are outraged because it's hurt their business.
Well, wait a minute. Let me bring this up. You've heard about these groups of people that run in the stores and grab clothes off the rack. So they're all thinking if each person only grabs $500 to $600 worth of stuff, they get a freebie, right?
Yeah, there you go.
And so that's why, and you should know, in San Francisco, they're hitting certain stores over and over again. And this is like 8 or 9 people will run in, grab a big bunch of things off a rack because they know it's not going to add up to $950, and it's a freebie.
Right.
And no one's stopping him.
Right.
So is this the kind of crime that started evolving from Proposition 47?
I think so. I think it has unleashed whole new criminal enterprises because people now know how to game the system. And whether these consequences were intended or unintended, what we do know is that it was a slipshod proposition that was not crafted or promoted with the interests of public safety in mind.
And so whose interest were these people pursuing? I mean, they're saying these prisoners were being treated unfairly or they were being picked on. What was the impetus for this proposition, and what was the impetus for these different groups, whether they were civil rights groups or teachers? What was their motivating force to try to get Proposition 47 passed?
Well, in the 90s, Governor Wilson instituted a number of measures aimed at increasing the consequences, the penalties for committing crimes in order to make Californians safer. And this had the intended effect. As a result of the reforms Governor Wilson put in place, our communities did become safer. But there's been this now counter movement against what Wilson was able to do by some who say, well, we have too many people in prison, so let's just pass all of these measures to let various groups out. And
Okay, so in New York, didn't they have, was it Giuliani who put...
Giuliani started at the bottom.
saying the thing like, okay, let's start enforcing these more petty crimes, because that kind of cleans new neighborhoods up.
Right.
And makes everything a little more stable. And when you have all these little petty crimes, if you're a police officer, if there's a lot of petty crimes going on, it's harder to notice big crimes, because the petty crimes can kind of, there's such background noise that you can't tell if there's a big crime going on.
Yeah, and that's part of it. And it's also just when you have conditions of lawlessness, then it serves as a breeding ground for more serious crimes. And you habituate people and they graduate to more serious crimes. And so with not only Proposition 47, but with realignment, with the weekend of 3 strikes, we're letting more and more offenders out before they're ready, before they've served their time. And we're seeing a marked spike in the homeless population in a lot of counties, in vagrancy, and these quality of life offenses we're talking about, like theft. And it's no wonder that we're then seeing not only a marked increase in these crimes, but also in violent crimes. In Sacramento, for example, homicide is up significantly in the year since Proposition 47 passed. And this is a huge concern because it's only going to get worse unless we raise public awareness and reverse these harmful policies.
Okay, because I think in New York they stopped that stop and frisk thing, right?
Yes, they did.
And so
De Blasio.
I mean, in a lot of cities, people are walking around with lethal weapons, and they don't get searched, they don't get stopped and frisked, and if you're a regular citizen walking around unarmed, you're at a disadvantage.
Right.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing I'm concerned about. You brought up earlier that prisons actually serve as a rehabilitation factor at some extent. So if we're letting people out, they're losing out on anything of a rehabilitation, correct? Sure. And so they're being put right back on the street with whatever education they've learned in prison, but not the rehabilitation factor.
Sure. Well, and I think we do need to do a better job with rehabilitation in our prisons. I think we need better vocational training so that when offenders are released, which should come at the appropriate time after they've served out their sentences, then they have the tools and the skills that they'll need in order to become productive members of society.
Oh. Okay, on that, Mark, I understand we're going to move into the final segment, and let's take it from there.
Now, so we've kind of looked at, the theory of this, and then how it happened, and what it is. And so let's take a look at the effect. Now, some people have argued that something like tens of thousands of felons could be eligible for release that are in prison right now. So how many... Basically, I'm not sure the number of how many are in prison in California, the state of California right now. I don't know that number, but what number are eligible for release, and do you have any idea what percentage that would be?
Well, it's been estimated, I think, that up to 1 million people could be eligible for the relief offered by
And how many people are in prison
47.
right now, do you know?
It's some multiple of that. I think it's, on the order
That's
of
an
maybe
incredible
a couple
amount of
million.
people.
It's an incredible amount of people, and we have had, I think, hundreds of thousands of Prop 47 resentencing petitions, because remember, this applies retroactively. It's not just for future offenses, it's people who are sitting in prison right now.
Right.
And
so that's what I'm thinking. How many people are going to get released?
So, yeah, it's not only that, it's also just that we're inundating the courts with these resentencing positions. And for all the talk of, we're going to save costs by releasing these prisoners early, there are a lot of costs associated, number one, with the litigation this creates, but number two, with the costs of crime, which are
but don't judges have any discretion on how they can stop this so people don't get out that should never get out? I don't understand this part.
Well, there are 2 stages to a Prop 47 resentencing petition. The first is an eligibility phase, which is whether you meet the requirements for relief in that you committed one of the qualifying offenses that's been downgraded to a misdemeanor. If you are eligible, then there is an assessment of whether you pose a danger to society. And the judge does have discretion to determine that you would be a danger and to deny you relief. There are also 6 offenses that if you have committed in the past, you are not eligible for release.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to
Prop
ask you.
47.
What if you have prior convictions for armed robbery, kidnapping, arson, part of a street gang? Does that have any bearing on your early release, or are those you can still get early release if those are
So
misdemeanors?
yes, so you are ineligible if you've committed one of, I believe, 6 enumerated felonies. Then you're ineligible for Prop 47 resentencing.
Okay. And no, there was a thing about stealing a gun, I guess. Stealing a gun used to always be a felony, pretty much, right?
Right, exactly.
And now you can steal a gun as long as it's a cheap gun.
Well, most guns, a handgun is, are under $950.
So basically, you can't shoot someone from very far away. So if you're going to rob someone, you want to be like just a foot or two. So if you got a cheap gun, you would hit them, right?
Well,
so,
I noticed, Kevin, that when they talk about the prior crimes that prevent you from being released, even if it's for a theft crime, a rape, murder, child molestation, and sex offender registry type crimes. So a lot of this is directed at maybe not violence, but interacting with the person that you've taken over control of them in some manner. Is that correct?
Like
is that
kidnapping
kind
or
of
something?
kidnapping, things like that? Those are the lines? Is that where the line's drawn?
Frankly, I just don't think there was a whole lot of thought put into it. They picked out a handful of serious-seeming felonies and said these are the ones where we'll deny it. But
I don't think arson is arson in that list?
No, it's not.
And I think arson can be pretty bad,
Yeah.
Well, Kevin, this
I mean,
is one
especially if there's somebody in there.
I did. Prior to your coming on the show, I actually pulled a list of excludable offenses, and it's a long list. But most of them are things like mayhem, torture, murder, of course,
Right.
human trafficking. These are things that are, indecent exposure. That could be vague in some level. But most of this, there's a huge volume of it that involves sex trade. Pimping, pandering, those kind of things. So it looks like somebody was paying attention to the sex crime zero area, but
Right.
all the personal events like breaking into cars, shoplifting, the gun thing. But, it seems like things that affect everybody.
Yeah,
They're left out.
And here's the important point: is that folks who commit these crimes often go on to commit the more serious crimes.
Well,
And
also,
if-
I think, I'm sorry to interrupt, but also because I was having some discussions with people about this, and they reduced breaking the window of a car from a felony to misdemeanor in San Francisco, and then everyone's window got broken the next night. I mean, every single car that wasn't in the garage got the window broken, right?
Right.
I mean, every single one. I mean, there wasn't one left, hardly.
It's an epidemic in
But
San
the point of the
Francisco,
matter
I
is,
know.
I don't think, okay, like if somebody mugs me, I'm going to throw them my wallet. I don't mind giving up my wallet because I've got $100 and some credit cards, right? If they took the credit card debt, actually would come out ahead.
Yeah, I wish I'd get the credit card debt that goes along
Just
with
take
that
the whole
credit card.
thing.
There you go.
Just take the keys to my office and take over the debt. But they don't do that. They only take what's liquid at the time. But the problem is, I don't think that's really the problem. Is like if someone breaks your car window and you confront them, then that's a potential for someone getting killed. And so I'm saying a lot of these things, like they say fighting words. It's like
Right.
screaming fire in a theater or calling somebody a blankety blankety blank. These are kind of fighting words. And keying someone's car or breaking their car window, people are feel very personally about their cars. That's going to be a flare of tempers, and that could
exactly. Or stealing a gun. What do you think they're doing
stealing
that
a
for?
gun, yeah.
They're going to just
But
put it on the wall.
all these things, for their gun collection, number 432.
On the wall.
Yeah,
Exactly.
But I mean, the thing is, all these things could incite a conflict.
Exactly.
And a normal citizen could get drawn into some conflict with someone who has a lot of experience fighting and maybe killing, and so a normal person could lose their temper and get drawn into something that they're not accustomed to, and then get hurt. badly hurt.
Exactly.
That's what I worry about because,
Sure.
If somebody breaks the window of your car, I mean, I've caught people jimming in my trunk, they're ice pick and I yell and I run up to them. I'm not really thinking when I run up to him, like, get away from my car, that he's probably
I
got a
don't know
knife or
about
a
an
gun.
ice picking the person saying, I don't know how fast I'd run up to them.
But I mean, when someone's busting your car, you scream at him, run over there. It's a
course.
natural instinct. It's a
Right.
stupid
And
thing
the
to
point
do.
that you're making is absolutely right, which is that we have created conditions where lawlessness
Where there's gonna be a
cannot be
conflict.
dealt with, and that will inevitably beget greater lawlessness.
And also, the cops are doing a great job as they can, but they're not going to get there in 5 or 10 minutes.
that's
It's going to take the cops 15
yeah.
minutes to get there. If
Well,
you
the
don't know
problem
anymore-
is that we've
That
made
brings up an interesting point. Kevin, when we were talking, you indicated the police have their hands handcuffed
yeah.
completely on this. And so you were indicating there's actually a program that you've worked with where it runs down what an officer can do when he confronts somebody committing a crime.
That's right.
So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so
And where do we find
my
that?
state assembly campaign has created what we're calling a Prop 47 law enforcement
And is that on a
simulator.
website someplace?
It's available on our website,
What's that?
KileyForAssembly.com.
Okay.
And we've actually had this seen by over 50,000 people throughout the state of California now. It lets you kind of step into the shoes of a California police officer to see what they can and cannot do under the legal regime ushered in by Prop 47, and just how limited their toolkit now is to deal with these offenses that are so harmful to our communities.
So how many police chiefs in the state of California supported Proposition 47?
I can't think of a single one, and I'll tell you this, since we have launched this Prop 47 simulator, and since I've been speaking out against Prop 47 in the course of our campaign, I've had law enforcement groups from across the state reach out to me. I've been endorsed by them because this is undermining their ability to do their important work of keeping the public safe, and they are very, very troubled by what's been going on and looking for change.
You know, this is almost as scary as Baltimore or something like that, but the statewide.
Sure.
So I got a question. Is there a movement right now that you've heard about or even rumored about that people trying to repeal Proposition 47?
Well, we don't have it coming for this next election. In fact, we have the opposite, the initiative from Governor Brown that I mentioned earlier, which will only exacerbate things. There are some things the legislature can do to address the problem of Prop 47. So when I'm elected, I'm going to get to work right away on addressing what can be addressed through legislative action. Number one, making it a felony to steal a gun. Number two, passing once again the bill and making sure Governor Brown signs it this time by raising public awareness that if you possess a date rape drug with the intent to commit sexual assault, that should be a felony. And number three, we haven't even touched upon the fact that by downgrading several felonies to misdemeanors, we can no longer collect DNA samples from those people because it's a felony conviction that triggers DNA
that's
collection.
a far-reaching because these people are committing crimes all over, leaving their DNA, and we don't even have them on record.
Exactly. And so I would introduce a bill to make several serious misdemeanors, such as those that used to be felonies before Prop 47, also trigger the collection of DNA. And this is also an important point. DNA is an essential tool for absolving the innocent. So the folks who sold this proposition to the public as something aimed at compassion, they've actually made it more difficult to exonerate innocent people. They've made it more difficult to treat drug addicts who are desperately in need of help. And they've harmed, most of all, the most vulnerable communities in California. So anyone who tries to tell you that this initiative was passed in the name of compassion is just wrong.
Well, I'm going to tell you, Kevin, I really appreciate you coming on the show tonight. And I know for myself, and I'm sure for Mark, we think this subject is critical.
Yeah, well, I learned a lot about this, and to tell you the truth, when this passed, it wasn't very well publicized.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't there was not much information to the public about this, and now that we're finding out about it, there's really some doubt
Well,
whether
it's
it's such a good idea.
It's scary, the implications.
It's scary.
You know, because when you look at these police officers, what they're up against, and if their hands are tied on a few more elements, very tough, the odds they are when they face every day. I don't think it's good for police morale.
Oh,
Probably.
absolutely. And police officers in cities and counties across California are doing extraordinary work to try to cope with the challenges they've been presented with. And we need to make it so public policy is on their side.
All right, Kevin, I really appreciate it. And I wanted to thank everyone for coming to the show tonight, and I hope that we'll be able to go for it.
So when is the elections on?
The election